Hello there! I'm sure most of you already know what PTM7950 is and its magical properties used for cooling hot electronics. I'm not only going to tell you how to apply it on a graphics card and CPU, we're also going to run some benchmark and most importantly, play around with this material a little bit. Hopefully, you can learn some valuable insights that will help you with your own application of PTM7950, or just sit back, relax, and enjoy this video. Despite how much I enjoy tearing down, my bank account has advised me not to open up my 5090 Astro LC at my own discretion. Moreover, ASUS already put phase change thermal pad, potentially PTM7950, as the thermal interface material instead of traditional thermal paste in their 5090s. So, I have acquired my girlfriend's PC, totally with her consent, and extracted my beloved TUF 3080 Ti that has withstood the test of time. Since I've been taking good care of it, it still looks pretty good. To disassemble this graphics card and replace the thermal material, all you need to do is just remove all the screws from the backplate. This one has actually never been opened before, so I was trying to get rid of the warranty sticker without breaking it. It's not like this card is still in warranty, I just want to see if this can be done or not. Unfortunately, the sticker is super fragile and a piece of it just broke off. Maybe someone else will have better luck with the heat gun, but let's move on to the next part. At this stage, what's holding the two parts together is just the adhesion of the thermal material that's already in there. And it is a little scary to open it up because you do need to use brute force. Once you can see the actual GPU die and the cooler surface, all you need to do is just use some isopropyl alcohol to wipe off the existing thermal paste. I did notice a black mark on top of a metal surface. Turns out it's just fur and dust that was collected in that area. I was trying to clean up what I thought was a stain that's on the cooler surface. Turns out that's the engraving on the die that's not transferred to the cooler plate. You can kinda see the NVIDIA logo that's inverted, and I wonder if this is caused by thermal expansion and also the mounting pressure between those two surfaces. With the surface prepared for new application, we can now take out the PTM7950. Depends on which vendor you choose, what comes in the package might be different. Mine is just from a random Amazon seller that I found. There are some finger gloves in the package and also a screwdriver, but what we'll be using is mainly just the sticker and the material itself. You don't have to be precise with the size of the material, but you do want to ensure that the CPU or GPU die surface is fully covered. My recommendation is to go over just a little bit to ensure that you have a good coverage, and don't worry, this is not like liquid metal, it's non-conductive, so it won't cause any issue if you get them on the PCB. And just to show you how tacky this material really is, the side of this thin sheet, which is only 0.25mm, is already attached to the plastic bag it came with, and I have to cut it open in order to extract the material from the package. The material itself is really not hard to cut if you're using scissors. You can use a ruler like a guide like me, or you can just use a Sharpie or something to mark the surface first before cutting. And just like that, we can now try to apply this to the GPU die. Before we can apply it to the GPU die surface, the first thing I need to do is to remove the plastic film. I strongly recommend you use a sticker or use some type of tape to secure a corner of the plastic film first. I'm going to show you why you don't want to peel it off in room temperature, or even worse when it's warmed up by your hand already. As you can see at this stage, the material is still soft and is also bonded to the plastic film. If you try to use something to pry the plastic film away from the material, you only end up pushing the material even further into the plastic sheets. So here's the secret weapon that I use to make this job so much easier. This is just a box of ice cubes I kept in my freezer. You can use anything you can find in the freezer that has a relatively flat surface. I may have left the PTM7950 there for a little bit too long. As you can see, there's quite a bit of condensation. You don't have to let it rest for too long, it will cool down very quickly. As you can see, this thing peels off like skin from a ripe banana. Sorry, that was a horrible analogy. Now we can put the side of the PTM7950 with the film removed to the die surface. I'm eyeballing it to make sure that if I put this down, I can cover the entire die surface. Since I have given myself some headroom, I don't have to be super precise. As long as this will cover the entire die surface, I'm good. If you have applied soft phone screen protectors before, you know that you don't want to put the entire sheet down all at once. You want to start from one side to the other to make sure you can squeeze out any air bubbles. The same principle applies here. I'm just trying to flatten this material from one side to the other. Just want to let you know that this is very important, and we'll come back to the topic of air bubbles later. The material itself is not transparent, so any small air bubbles won't be visible. However, larger packets of air will appear on the surface of the material. Since the material actually doesn't stick to metal super well, at least not initially, before there's any thermal cycle, you can try to carefully peel it off and try to reapply it to eliminate any air bubbles. And that is exactly what I'm trying to do here. With the air pockets removed, now it's time to remove the film from the other side. Since now we have limited surface clearance, obviously the ice cube box is not going to work. But what you can do is to put an ice cube inside of a watertight bag. And if you do this quickly, the condensation is going to be minimum and you can probably get away with it even if water drops on it, because the water will be on the surface of the plastic film. And now you can just gently wrap the plastic bag with the ice cube inside onto the plastic film. I did a horrible job filming it here because my head was in the way. But basically what I did is to make sure the material itself is hard enough that allows me to separate a corner of the material from the plastic film. And with the help of this little plastic squeegee, I can push down on the material that's already separated in the corner and just peel off the rest of the plastic film. Just want to let you know that I did get a better shot of this in the CPU application part. Since you're opening the GPU up and replacing the thermal paste, or applying PTM7950 in this case, you might as well replace the thermal pads to get better performance out of it. I am not doing that this time because I did run benchmark before and after the application, and I do want to keep everything else the same or worse than before to show you if the PTM7950 really make a difference when compared to the old thermal paste that's in there. For the CPU application, I'm going to use my 13900K as an example. I am not going to fully disassemble this computer because it's so hard to take things out and put it back in. And trust me, everything you see that's wrong there has a reason. The reason why I'm using a 12-pin adapter instead of the one that comes with the power supply is because this graphics card already burned the two OEM power cable that came with my Be Quiet power supply. I know this doesn't look pretty, but trust me, I have tried everything and this is the only configuration that will work with this case. Just don't get me started on this build, please. However, what I can tell you is the reason why I'm still using the Intel Core i9 13900K instead of a newer AMD CPU. Well, I actually do have a Ryzen 7 9800X3D and I have it in the other PC that you just saw. My girlfriend's using that computer and she plays games at a lower resolution, usually it's only 1080p. And because of that, she can actually gain a way better performance boost from the 9800X3D than I will ever get. For example, using the 3080 Ti I just showed you, combined with 9800X3D at 1080p, she can play ultra ray traced Cyberpunk 2077 at more than 100 frames per second. And that's with DLSS turned off or with the ultra quality setting. It looks absolutely beautiful and it runs super smooth. Like, actually, I know nowadays graphics card and everything are kind of expensive and hard to get. So if you don't mind lower resolution gaming, you can potentially get an older GPU and pair with a newer AMD CPU with 3D V-Cache to get still really good performance, really high frames, but you will spend less money in total. Okay, back to the PTM application. We have now loosened all the screw from the CPU cooler and it is ready for removal. However, because the radiator is still attached, I can now just remove the entire cooler, and the cooler needs to sit somewhere, and my concern is the thermal paste that's still on the cooling plate will get smeared to other surfaces. So what I'm going to do is to use some plastic wraps to just wrap around the cooling plate to contain the thermal paste on there. And now we can safely set this aside. I'm just going to let it rest on the RAM. I know this looks a little bit sketchy, but trust me, I've done this before. You don't want the cooling plate to rest on anything hard. You don't want it to rest on any metal surfaces. My RAM has an outer plastic shell, and also the plastic wrap around the cooling plate will help prevent any scratches on the plate itself. And now it's the same step as before. You want to clean up any existing thermal paste from the CPU. It's not really the CPU die because the die itself is actually inside of this metal casing. I'm just going to call it the CPU. You want to clean up the CPU using some isopropyl alcohol just to make sure you remove all the thermal paste that's on there. And now you can clean up the cooling plate of your CPU cooler. I'm going to skip some of the footages here. It's all the same step for removing the thermal paste from the cooler plate. And I did apply a new plastic wrap to it just to make sure that the surface itself is safe from dirt or anything that may have get on the surface while I'm doing other stuff. And now it's the same step of cutting the PTM7950, using my beloved ice cube box to cool down the material. Remove one layer of the protective film. Apply the naked side of the material to the CPU surface while trying to squeeze out any air bubbles. And I'm using my finger this time just to show you that you don't really need to have any fancy tool to squeeze out the air bubble. As long as you're moving slow, you're moving from one direction to the other, you should be fine. And now with the help of the ice bag, you can quickly cool down the material while it's already seated on the CPU surface. And now what you want to do is to use some tool like this plastic squeegee to separate and push down on the material. While you're holding down the material, you can now lift and just peel off the protective film. And now we can carefully seat the CPU cooler back to the motherboard. And now we're ready to tighten the CPU cooler. You want to tighten the screws in an diagonal or X pattern. Start by slightly tightening one corner, then you can move to the opposite corner and slightly tighten. Repeat the same process for the other remaining two screws. By doing this, you can prevent any uneven contact between the two surfaces. You are less likely to create any warping effect or cause any additional mounting stress on the motherboard. And super beneficial to what we're trying to achieve here, this will help us spread out the thermal material, which is the PTM7950, uniformly. This will help us create a thin and consistent layer for efficient heat conduction. And once the cooler is installed, I'm going to put on the shroud. I just want you guys to hear the magnetic attachment sound, which is kind of satisfying. Before moving to the fun stuff, I do want to show you the benchmark I run. I'm going to be completely honest here, I didn't see anything that is super drastic in terms of thermal performance. For the GPU, I'm actually surprised by how well the original thermal paste has held up. After lighting the PTM7950 to run a few thermal cycles, which is super important because if you benchmark right away, in many cases, the performance will actually get worse compared to traditional thermal paste. This is due to the phase change nature of PTM7950. When you heat it up, it becomes more fluid, it becomes softer, giving the material a better chance at filling any microscopic gaps between the surfaces. Moreover, thanks to the mounting pressure of the CPU cooler, the now softened material can be spread out even thinner and even more evenly. This will help create a stable and low resistance thermal path between the CPU and the CPU cooler. Again, in terms of performance, there really isn't much of a jump. However, I was able to pass the Still Nomad stress test in 3D Mark. I know if we look at the number of the worst look score, we were able to improve less than 5%, which can be within the margin of error. However, in all my previous stress tests, I was never able to achieve a passed result. So I believe there is a slight performance improvement, especially if you consider that I didn't even replace the original thermal pad that was in there. And those original thermal pads are definitely in a worse position than before, making less contacts between the surfaces, potentially causing other parts of the graphics card to heat up even more. In terms of the thermal graph, it's pretty much the same. I didn't notice those spikes are decreased in the second test with PTM7950 installed. However, those spikes in GPU temperature also coincides with the GPU being utilized more than 100% on the graph. There's probably some driver, software, or even sensor issue that's causing those spikes on the graph. And if you ignore those spikes on the graph, the two test results looks identical. For the CPU benchmark, my original plan was to use OCCT for stress test and calculate the average temperature change. I'm not sure if it's because I'm using the free version, but OCCT doesn't calculate the average temperature contained within the test. That means if I wait longer before starting the test, the additional wait time while the cores are being really chill is also being factored into the average temperature calculation. That means if I paused for longer between the tests, it will actually make the average temperature lower. So what I decided to use is actually the highest temperature of each core at the end of the stress test. During both tests, the CPU was consuming about 253 watts of power, therefore the thermal output should be identical. And the system with PTM7950 did achieve better thermal result. On average, the cores are now 1.79% cooler than before. I should probably mention the thermal paste that I used before is Thermal Grizzly's Cryonaut, which is already a really good thermal interface material, so I'm just happy to see any improvements. What's more interesting is the P-core's improvement is at 2.63%. Again, the conditions including the fan speed between the two tests are the same, and this test should tell us that PTM7950 is actually better at transferring heat. I fully understand my test here is a bit janky, so if you want to see how different thermal interface material compares to each other, Tom's Hardware has this article comparing over 50 of them. I will link this article in the description because it's just a wonderful resource to have. And now it's time to open up a new pack of PTM7950 and try something fun. I always wanted to see how this material phase change in action. Well, you can't really do that when the material is under the heatsink. So here's the cheapest tempered glass phone screen protector I can find, and this is a bag of spring clamps. What I'm going to do is to see if I can put this material between the two phone screen protectors, giving us a transparent window to see what's going on behind the surface. As you can see, even after a decent application, the air can still be trapped under the surface. After applying some pressure using my hands, you can see the air bubble sizes has decreased, however they're still there. And now it's time to put another sheet of glass on it. And I've decided to drop the other glass on top of it before trying to push it down. Hopefully this will simulate what will happen if you're putting the cooler on top of your CPU or GPU. And I have to say that the air bubble looks horrible. There's a huge packet of air on the material. I'm going to put some clamps on the glass between the PTM7950. Hopefully this will give us some mounting pressure, even though it's going to be nowhere near the actual mounting pressure when it's between the CPU cooler. And you can already see the material getting more spread out due to the pressure, and the air bubble has decreased in size. It's just to show you how important mounting pressure is. As you can see, the material is already making better contact, even though it's still at room temperature. And I'm going to change that by bringing up a heat gun. Just like what we did in the benchmark, I'm going to try to put the materials through a few heat cycles first. So I have started with a higher temperature than the CPU will ever get, which is 120 degrees Celsius. This is so I can heat up the material faster. After heating up the material and let it cool down a few times, and with some pressure from my hand, you can see the large air bubble has decreased in size a lot. However, it's still clear that the material is not making a full contact with the glass, and the air bubble there is going to cause some insulating effect, which is not what we want for a thermal interface material. And the smaller air bubbles are still on the other side of the glass as well. So I have decided to adjust the mounting a little bit to hopefully apply more pressure on the material. With more time spent under pressure and heat, the air bubble has decreased in size even more. I also decided to use a wet paper towel to cool down the material even faster to hopefully make it went through even more cycles. After many cycles, you can see the smaller air bubbles has been closed up by a lot, and the large air bubble is almost fully closed up. After applying more pressure manually and also going through more heat cycle, the large air bubble has completely disappeared from the surface. But if you look closely, you can still see a silhouette of it. This means that the air bubble is still in there, but the PTM7950 has wrapped around it. I understand this is a bit hard to see, so I'm going to open this up so you can see the air channel that's in there. You can clearly see the previous air packet that was surrounded by PTM7950. I do have a confession to make. The reason why the material seems to only stick to one side of the glass is because I messed up the side and I used the side of the glass protective film that actually have a layer of plastic on it. If the material was between two layers of glass or metal surfaces, the separation is going to look something more like this. One thing I couldn't stress enough is that PTM7950 is fluid in the same way that tar is fluid. It is highly viscous, even heated beyond the phase change temperature. I have rolled the material into a ball and I'm trying to heat it up to 80 degrees Celsius. And as you can see, it's not really melting or anything like that. The hardness of the material after it has been heated up is more like traditional thermal paste, which is probably not what you think of when you hear the word fluid. This also helps us explain why the air bubbles never seem to go away. The fluid state of the PTM7950 is still too viscous for the air bubbles to escape the material. Remember the small air bubbles? They never closed up even after I tried to heat up the material sideways. I do believe under higher mounting pressure and also give it more heat cycles to go through, it will probably get encased like the larger air bubble. But it should be pretty obvious that those air bubbles are still in there between layers, and even so when they are surrounded by the material, the heat will have a least resistant path to go around them. It will still have a worse thermal performance than having no air bubbles at all. This is why I was trying to let you know that you should try your best to squeeze out any air bubbles during the application process. And that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. One more thing I want to add is that the PTM7950 material can be hard to remove if you accidentally smeared it on any rough surfaces. I find that using glue guns seems to be a pretty effective way of removing it. You know, the more you know. I sincerely hope you learned something helpful in this video. I'm trying to build this channel not on purely tech related topics, just anything I find interesting, anything I'm willing to dig into. Hopefully I'm privileged enough to find someone that shares the same interest, and if you do, please consider subscribing. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!